It's been a lot of my husband speaking into him as well, because especially as teen boys get older, mom is great, but dad really needs to step in and be able to speak to them man to man.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back with Leigh Nguyen, and well, we're just having a fun conversation this week about homeschooling and family, and homeschooling is fun. I love homeschooling. I love that there are so many things that homeschooling encompasses, and it's all about family. It's about relationships. It's about academics. It's about teaching our kids to be who God created them to be. One of those things, like we talked about in yesterday's episode, which if you missed it, go back and listen. But we talked about how some kids are created to be entrepreneurs and some kids are created to be employees. Some are leaders, some are followers, and neither is a bad thing. Like that's how the world works, right? That's how God created mankind to work together. And that's how God created the body of Christ to work together. I mean, if you look at that in the sense of the church, right, you have a pastor who leads, and then you have the people in the congregation who follow, and that is a good thing. But we need good, strong leaders to lead us to truth. So that's a whole different topic. But anyway, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it's just so interesting how the body of Christ works that way as well. So today we're going to talk about some of those things. We're going to talk a little bit about helping our kids to become entrepreneurs, if that's what God has called them to do. I also want to talk about gap year and what that might look like. We've got a gap year, I want to say student, but I guess she's not going to be a student anymore since it's a gap year, right? So a gap year adult coming into our home. And that's an exciting time for us. So we're going to talk about those things and a few other things today. But before we get into it, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. If you're looking for a great homeschool curriculum for any subject, any grade, any age, whatever it is that you need, check out bjupresshomeschool.com. They will equip you for a successful homeschool journey, and they will be with you every step of the way. They are amazing, and they're grateful to be part of your homeschool journey. So check them out at bjupresshomeschool.com. And if you're not sure what you need, call them up, talk to one of their consultants, and they will help walk you through what is best for your family. They'll also help encourage a love of learning in your kids, and everything they do, as you know, is from a strong biblical worldview. So check them out, bjupresshomeschool.com. Well, Leigh, welcome back to the podcast. This has been such a fun conversation this week. Let's talk about teaching our kids to be entrepreneurs. And I want to focus really on those ones that, like, this is just how God created them. And I know you've got a son who is an entrepreneur. Talk a little bit maybe about his story, what you've learned in the process, what he's learned in the process. And for those of us who have kids who are going down that path, how can we help guide them?
Let me just start by saying that I didn't come from an entrepreneurial background. So this was all brand new. So this was really a work that had to happen in me as well, of letting him go and try things and to trust. As we've talked in earlier episodes about just stepping in and just recreating the school at home. And we think that that's how it has to look. And realizing as he got older, there's just something different. So this is my now 19-year-old, my second born, my oldest son. And I started to realize that he's just as wired differently. He's very different from his older sister, which they complement each other wonderfully. And she just would go along and do the academics and do everything. And we took some time to get into what she was interested in. But him, he just was wired different. He just really began to push back. Now, if you heard the beginning of my story, he was the kindergartner that was always getting into, in air quotes, trouble. Right. He was always pushing back against, me, this has been all of our home, all of his childhood. And we're such good friends now. It's really wonderful. We've worked through all of that and learned our strengths and our weaknesses and stuff. But just as parents, allowing our kids to be who God has created them to be. And as we spoke about earlier, about just really what are their gifts, talents, and abilities. I found as he got to high school, we had done a lot of reading. You and I were talking about morning time and just reading and just how we enjoyed reading together. And he was a big avid reader. And I found as he got to high school, he just was pushing back on the books that I wanted him to read. And finally I was like, okay, that's it. What do you want to read? He was like, I want to read business books. And I was like, okay, but you're 15. And so I was a little cautious because a lot of the business books were written for adults, and I don't really know all the material that's in it. So I asked a couple of friends that we have who own their own businesses and, what are some books? And they kind of gave us some ideas and went to the library. And long story short, so here he is how many years later, and he has a bookshelf full of books and he buys them all on his own. And, I've trust that the foundation we've laid, that he can kind of weed through some of the different worldviews that'll be pushed into those. And so just being like, okay, you don't want to read this historical fiction books that I wanted you to read, that I thought that would be a great thing for you to read in high school. What do you want to read? So he read the business books. He got into autobiographies and biographies of probably business people. And, so really just kind of caught that bug. So really it was also a part of, for me, letting him go and trusting him, and then guiding him, and, myself as well as my husband, guiding him, putting up guardrails for things and not just diving straight into things. And so he started with a little firewood stand when he was like 13, 14, chopping up the firewood, and then moved into pushing a push mower down the street. We moved to where we are now. We were living out in the country, and now we're living in the suburbs and just mowing different lawns. And so I found at the point that he was going into his junior year, I was like, he's done. Like he's done with this. He's ready to run. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs are just ready to run early. And we graduated him a year early, and he's just been running full speed ever since. We get into the gap year, I'll kind of explain a little bit what he did with what would have been his senior year, his 12th grade year. But I just have found that just some kids are just wired that way, and that's okay. And we have to let them go a little bit. We need to trust them, but we also need to, it's a lot more work at times to keep up with what do you want to do? And they want to do all of these things. So now my 16-year-old sees what the 19-year-old's doing. And he's like, well, I want to do this. I want to do that. And I want to be able to market maybe on social media. And we haven't given our kids social media at that age. And I'm like, okay, so how can we work this? You want to create YouTube videos, but you don't have free access to YouTube. Right. So how can we work this where you still get to do that, and you can edit and everything on the back end, and then together we post it. And so just kind of figure those things out. So I don't know if I answered that question or.
No, totally. Talk about this, because as our kids are growing into this world of entrepreneurship, oftentimes I feel like they see dollar signs. They are like, I want to become a millionaire. And so I'm going to become an entrepreneur, and I'm going to do this thing, and maybe they've read about it in a book. As you said, your son read books, or they've read a blog, or they've listened to a podcast or something. And they see this like flashy, dollar sign ahead of them. But how do you guide them to what is it that God wants for you? What has God created you to do? Have you dealt with that with your son? Because it's not just about being a successful entrepreneur. Yes, perhaps God's created you to do that. But let me back up really quickly. The reason I asked this question is because for my husband, I know one of the things, he's an entrepreneur, he produces this podcast. He makes movies. He does his own thing. He hasn't always been an entrepreneur, but he really got to the point where he felt like he wanted to make a difference in God's kingdom. Like that's what he wanted to do. And whether that's through mowing lawns or producing a podcast, it doesn't matter. But have you gone down that road with your son of how are you going to impact God's kingdom with the talents and abilities and gifts that he's given to you?
That's a very good question. In the beginning, yes, it was dollar signs. It was looking at the money that I have and looking, even if it was just $300 he made from cutting firewood. Yeah. And so that really was a big thing. And that's been very intentional. And it's been a lot of my husband speaking into him as well, because especially as teen boys get older, mom is great, but dad really needs to step in and be able to speak to them man to man. And so there was a lot of conversations about that. And that still is, I mean, it's a personal thing that he has to continue to battle. And to him at this point, he's dealing with such broad, big numbers at times that it just is numbers, that it's not necessarily anything that's flashy. He's not going out and buying all kinds of things. And he actually learned pretty quick. We went through I guess it was Dave Ramsey's financial whatever course for homeschoolers. Right. And he learned a lot that he already kind of knew. And he ended up getting a job at a grocery store to make some money so that he could then pour into his business. And some of the kids, there was one particular girl who had a car, and he's like, it was a brand new car, and she said she had bought it. And he was kind of asking some questions and had to explain to her what financing was. She didn't even know. And it was just, to him, it was eye-opening to see how other people, I think there was a really good example to him of how other people then can view money, and then how a better view of it is, and how can we manage it well. So going back to yes, in the beginning, it was pretty flashy as far as like, look at me, I have $500 and
Right.
I'm, 14, 15 years old. And that's, more than all my friends have and kind of thing. And it really just, again, goes into that, tying into that biblical worldview and what is our purpose here, to glorify God, and how can we do that? You can do that no matter where you work, whether you are the guy that's mowing the lawn, or you're the guy who's owned the lawn company, or you're the guy who is producing the movie, or you're the guy who is the actor, or you're behind the scenes and you're holding the camera. In every way we can glorify God. And so it's been a journey, and it's just been different people and different things speaking into him. And I know that it's at this point in God's hands. We went to a different church. We were visiting my daughter, and it happened to be the very first time we'd ever gone to this church. And the pastor talked about money, and I just saw him sitting there, just soaking it all in. And my husband and I were kind of nudging each other, like, yeah. Like, this is why this is the Sunday that we're here, is for him to be able to hear that message yet again.
Yeah. Yeah. Because even if their business isn't ministry, they can still use the funds that God provides for them to be able to pour it back into God's kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to teach kids, I think, because they see that bank account rolling up and they're like, oh, wow, I can do a whole lot of things with this money.
And realizing the impact they can have on, if you have employees,
right,
that you can speak into people that you wouldn't have had other opportunities. And he's given me some examples of just recently, he says, it's just naturally a part of who he is.
Yeah.
And he'll just kind of talk about God or something. And sometimes, he notices some of his workers just get a little quiet. He's like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? But then I'll ask him questions too. So it's just, so we've been have talked to him all along, is run this different than somebody else would.
Right.
Be different, run your business differently, and help them to be like, have them notice, like, what's different?
Ask the question.
I've had these other bosses, and they were, even though it was my fault, I slacked off and stuff, but they were really rude to me. And then, this boss slacked off and stuff, but I still maybe lost my job, or I still got, reprimanded, we're still something got a talking to because I did something that I should not have done, but they did it in a different way. And so we've just really tried to encourage him to do things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think finding people in our community who are, business owners, entrepreneurs themselves, who will help speak, life into them and encourage them, and, maybe bring them alongside as an apprentice or something. There are lots and lots of programs even now today, Christian programs, that offer apprenticeship styles of learning. And I think it's such a great thing. So yeah, good stuff. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. We want to thank all our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, and Apologia. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies, and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Leigh. Let's talk about gap years, because I know years ago I was like, gap year, what is that? I don't even know what that is. That was a whole new term to me. And I'm talking, this was only like maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago that I had never heard of a gap year. Talk about what that is and how that can be beneficial to a homeschool family.
I was in the same boat. Hadn't heard of a gap year. I guess maybe I'd heard about a program. I had heard about a program maybe 10 years ago that young adults could do. And I didn't really know quite where it fit. I was like, do you do it before you go to college? It was really targeted towards college kids. And that might have been about 10 years ago that program started. And so the gap year idea really didn't hit me until maybe, like you said, 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe people just kind of started talking about it more. And I was like, that kind of sounds neat. That sounds like a really neat idea behind it. And it can look so different. We can get into that, like, what exactly is a gap year and what can that look like? And then it kind of got to the point where we really started looking at just kids just going straight off to college, and my own experience going straight off to college and not really knowing what I'm doing, not feeling grounded, and just saying, I'd really like to give them a year to ground them. And so we'll say the word required each of our kids to do a gap year, but it's not like a demanding you have to do this. We've really tried to find a program or find something that fits with them, that they're excited to go to. So it's not something that they have to do. But a gap year doesn't have to be, we can get to that too, but it doesn't have to be some type of program. It can be, but that's what we have opted for.
Yeah. Yeah. So what has that looked like for each of your kids? Because you've got your older daughter who's in college right now, right?
Well, she's Yeah, she's working at a ministry right now.
She's working in ministry. Okay. I
Yeah.
was like, wait, I just said she's in college, but maybe she's not in college.
No.
And then your son, who is an entrepreneur. So what has that looked like for both of them as far as the gap year?
Yeah, so our daughter went to a gap year program. It was 2 semesters. She ended up graduating May of 2021, and we had found the program. We're like, this is what we're going to do. But she decided then at that point to stay home through the summer and not do their fall semester and to just work and to save up some money so that she could help pay for the gap year program as well. So she stayed home then for 9 months, and then in 2022 did like the winter, spring semester, and then came home for the summer, and then did their fall into up to Christmas semester. And then after that, she got a job with a ministry. So that's what she has been doing. And the program was perfect for her. My boys have no desire to attend that program. It's a wonderful program, but it just doesn't fit them.
Yeah.
So then it got to my second child, my first son. So there's a 2-year difference, but he graduated a year early. So it really was only a year until we started looking for something. And for him, my husband and I were like, it needs to be like go big or go home, like kind of thing. And so he also had his business that he wanted to be running. So he didn't necessarily want to do a full year. So we're like, okay, we could do a full year of something, but we opted then. Instead, he spent 4 months in Africa. So he went on a missions trip for 4 months and was fully immersed into other culture. And we were like, okay, if you did 4-month mission trip, like that'll count as an entire gap year. So that's what he had, as I alluded earlier, that's what he did for half of what would have been his senior year. And that was so much better than him sitting at home, writing papers or reading some books that he didn't want to read or studying some history thing. This was just fully immersive for him just to kind of jump in. And he came back just he came back as a young man, very different. And it was perfect fit for him. So now I have one more, and not leaning towards graduating him early. So I have a couple of years. And so he's kind of excited. He's exploring some different options, and I'm excited about what God brings us for him to do. And again, it doesn't have to be a program that a child goes to, or even that he goes to. It could just be, I don't know, do you want to talk about that? Like what a gap year different options are? Or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. We have a few minutes. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. So a gap year doesn't necessarily have to be a program. It can just be a time. I look at it as a time, like a buffer for a kiddo to take and step away from homeschool. I remember my daughter was still at home and we started our next homeschool year, and we were talking earlier about morning time, and she was home but not participating in morning time, or she was going to her job and she was doing some shift work and stuff. And it was a little sad, but it was good for her to be home and to have that buffer of, I'm not necessarily doing what I was doing. I am older, I am more mature, and I'm doing other things. So sometimes kids take a gap year and they do a program. Some take time and they might get a job. They might volunteer somewhere. They might do a couple different things. They might just kind of live for a while, but I encourage them to do something, whether it is some type of ministry or you're volunteering or a job, but just some way to take that space in between before making a decision as to what you're going to go on to next. Maybe it's ministry work, maybe it's college, maybe it is trade school, maybe it's starting a business, but there's a lot of options. And I think it gives them a chance, an opportunity to really just kind of settle and let the dust settle from homeschool and to figure out what are the next steps.
Yeah. We'll put a couple of links in the show notes, because I know we have interviewed a few different people that have different gap year programs. And so we'll put those links in the show notes for people to go back to those podcast episodes as well. But I think it is such it's funny. You get to the end of that senior year. And do you remember when we were in school, we would call it senioritis. You have senioritis, and like you just get to that last semester, and most seniors, whether you're in homeschool or public school, private schools, it's that mentality of like, I'm almost done. So you just kind of check out anyway. And that year following, it's like we just oftentimes throw kids into a university, and which, for some, that's fine. It's not that that's a wrong thing to do, but for a lot of kids, they're just not ready for that yet. They need to grow, and a whole lot of growing can happen in a year, right? And when they don't have the pressure of homeschooling and they can just kind of figure out life, that's a great year for the Lord to grow them and help them to figure out what direction to go next. Maybe not take on that $200,000, student loan that they're going to need to educate, be educated for the next 4 years, and just figure out or save, like you said, take a year to save money so that maybe you can go to a program or go to college or do something that will benefit you without having to just stress out about it. I just feel like kids need a break. They need that Sabbath year kind of from school to just breathe and figure out, what next. So anyway, all great stuff, but we are out of time. So we have just a minute left. Could you tell us, you've shared your, with us that you do your Little by Little Homeschool podcast. You've got your blog, Little by Little Homeschool. What do you have on your website? I know you've got a couple of courses that you offer. Talk about that for just a minute.
Sure. Yeah. I offer mentorship. If you want to do anything like one-on-one, I do that, as well as offer some courses, which are just self-paced. So there are a couple courses. I'm working on some other ones as well, but those are all listed in the menu. They could range from finding maybe your curriculum to really establishing your homeschool, as well as a course that has to do all with creating your own chore management system and just getting all of those things, all those tasks, and keeping up with all of the cleaning, which we know is a hard thing at times for homeschool moms. That's specific to homeschool moms because our lifestyle is a little bit unique. So you can find that all on the website.
Okay, awesome. We'll put links to those things in the show notes. Leigh, thank you so much for being with us this week. It has been so much fun chatting with you. Thank you for your encouragement and just for being one of those mamas who's gone ahead of a lot of homeschool moms and just said, this is how we did it, and it's going to be good, and it's going to be fine, and it's all going to work out. So if you have one last word of encouragement to our audience, what would you say?
I would say to focus on the relationship over curriculum. As we're talking, there's just so much focus on curriculum. And the curriculum is great. It is a resource and come alongside us. I remember not knowing, how am I going to teach my kids math? I was told that I was terrible at math in school and felt like I couldn't do it. I wasn't going to get it wrong. So those are great. Let's let them come alongside us. They can serve us well, but focus on the relationship over all of that. Because when we become so hard-handed about the curriculum, we lose the relationship. And in the end, the relationship is what's going to show as our kids move on and they take flight and they leave our homes.
Yep. That's awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening. Stay tuned at the very end to hear what's coming up next on the podcast. And if you have not yet watched the movie Schoolhouse Rocked, you can stream it for free through our website, schoolhouserocked.com. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you back here on Monday with another fantastic guest. Bye.
Laughing in the face of imposter syndrome and coming to you from the epicenter of manly overconfidence, I'm your host, Garrett Hampton, and you are listening to The Thinking Dad.
Even if we're able to push the evildoers and the totalitarians back for another generation, maybe if we work really hard, maybe even 2 generations, if they've got the young people, it's over.
I often think about Daniel's parents, who you don't hear anything about. But they must have laid down the foundation for Daniel to be able to go into Babylon and not fall.
We're in that very beginning part of the cycle for tough times. We've been fat and happy. We've been enjoying we're lazy because we enjoy so much freedom. We got all these blessings, and why would you go do the hard work? And so for a long time now, decades, we haven't had to do the hard work. We've been living on the fumes of previous generations paying the price. And we got to raise the bar and say, I'm willing to give more of my life, that's my time, more of my money, of course, that's our fortune, and more of my sacred honor, which is my reputation. I'm willing to put it all on the line. Every single one of us has to be willing to do that.
Join us for the first season of The Thinking Dad at thinkingdad.net.
And I can tell you, I don't have a degree. I don't have any kind of college degree. I don't even have any college experience. I have a high school diploma, but I can tell you that I know my kids and I love my kids, and I am a professional. I have a degree in my children.
Right.
And I got that as we walked along.
Yeah.
And so you as a parent can do the exact same thing. And I think that's the biggest message in my book that can help give parents the confidence to say, I actually can do this.